Hello everyone, I'm Lindsay from Happy Hour Stitches, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make these festive stars and stripes coasters for all of your summer get-togethers. So make sure you grab the pattern and the materials list in the video description. And let's start sewing. First up is this star block. It's a classic block, it's easy to make, and I'm going to share my best tips for making flying geese units and star blocks. First thing we need to do when we're making our star coaster is to make our flying geese unit. So I have my rectangle here, and we're going to put our square in the corner and sew from corner to corner on the diagonal. Now you can mark this with a pencil or a hair marker if you want. I simply just like to fold my square in half and do a little finger press, and you can see you get a nice mark. Layer it, and I'll take this over to my sewing machine. So when I'm sewing this, instead of starting at the point, because that can get sucked into my machine, I like to flip it and start at the center of the rectangle, and that just gives me a nice clean start, clean seam line. Once I've sewn the seam, I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch outside that seam line. I'm just going to take my ruler here. There we go, and I'm just going to press this open. To complete our flying geese, we're going to take another square right side down, and then we're going to sew that square on diagonally like that. So after I sewed, I trimmed to a 1/4 inch and I pressed just like before, and then I repeated the process to make 4 total flying geese units. Now let's assemble our star. So we have a larger square in the center, our flying geese surrounding it, and then we have some blue squares for the corners. Now we're going to sew our pieces into rows, and then we're going to sew those rows together to make our star block. My biggest tip when I'm sewing, especially flying geese units, is that I will sew with the flying geese unit on top, because then when I'm sewing, I can make sure I'm sewing next to the point of the star and not through it. I don't want to cut it off. So when I have this on top, I can make sure that even if my seam is off a little bit, I'm making sure I'm preserving that point. And there's my finished star block. I pressed away from the flying geese units and then towards the middle. Now let's move on to making our stripe block. Now I share a very easy tip for getting the diagonal stripe design in these coasters. First, we're going to lay out our strips of fabric. So I have just taken a few different reds and white fabric. They're all about 10 inches in length. I'm just grabbing scraps I had, so they're not all exact. And then I'm just making sure the 2 strips on the ends are 2 inches wide, and all the strips in the middle are cut at 1 3/4 inch wide. Now we're just going to sew them together in a row. Okay, so I've sewed all my strips together, and then I've pressed them all to one side. And now we're going to trim. So you're going to trim this to 6.5 inches on the diagonal. And this can be tricky if you don't have the right ruler. So I did not have a 6.5 inch wide ruler. So I took a 10.5 inch wide ruler, and I have used washi tape, decorative tape, to mark 6.5 inches square. And then what we're going to do is we're going to align our 45-degree angle with the center strip. So I'm not going to measure exactly. I am just going to make sure it's in the middle of this white strip, and I'm going to make sure this 6.5 inch area is all on my fabric so that I'm not cutting off something that I shouldn't be. So once I have this aligned, I'm going to take my rotary cutter. I'm just going to cut and cut. And then I'm gonna flip this the other way. And then again, I'm gonna use this. Now I can align my bottom with these tape marks on my ruler. Okay, once everything is aligned, I'm just gonna trim the other two sides. And here we go. We have a fun stripes coaster. Now that our coaster tops are done, it's time to quilt them. So we're gonna take a piece of fabric, lay it right side down, put a piece of batting on top, and then our block. Now we're gonna quilt it however we'd like. Okay, I've quilted and trimmed both of my coasters. On the star, you can see I quilted about a 1/4 inch on the inside of the star and a 1/4 inch on the outside of the star. And then on the stripes coaster, I quilted a 1/4 inch on the inside of each white strip. So just simple quilting, nothing fancy, just to hold layers together. Now we're gonna bind. So I'm gonna use blue binding on the stripes, and I'm gonna use red binding on the blue. Thanks for sewing along with me as we made our Stars and Stripes coasters. I hope they are a hit at your next summer party. If you haven't, check out our website, hhstitches.com. We have other free patterns like these coasters and some patriotic patterns like the scrappy star pattern you see behind me. Thanks for joining me for happy hour.